Hello everybody, welcome back to the Pixel Files. It's great to see you again. This week's video is going to be very different because I'm hardly going to be in it. Yay! You won't have to listen to my waffle for 20 or 30 minutes. This is all about a documentary that was aired on BBC Two, I think it was, in 1992. And it's about Ridley Scott. And Ridley Scott is without a doubt my favourite filmmaker. He has to be, because he directed my top two favourite films of all time, Alien and Blade Runner, both science fiction films, both masterpieces. And having grown up with Ridley Scott throughout my life and looking at his whole body of work, yes, he has had some misfires, it's true. Films like White Squall and G.I. Jane and Matchstick Men I wasn't very keen on. They're a small amount in a big body of really good work. But Alien and Blade Runner were kind of his golden period. That's when he was really at the peak of his powers, which was interesting because he was still a relatively new filmmaker at that point. So growing up with his films in the 80s and 90s, it was difficult to get information on Ridley Scott other than to buy books. And I was looking in my film book collection, and I do have a Ridley Scott biography. This one's by the author James Clark. It's a pretty decent book. It outlines Ridley Scott's rise into filmmaking, and then it gives a breakdown of each movie that he did up to that point, up to and including Black Hawk Down. But there was one documentary that was aired that stood out to me. And luckily, I recorded it when it was broadcast. And then when the technology arrived to turn VHS into DVDs, I did that, and then I turned that DVD into an MP4 file, which I've had stored on a hard drive for years. And I have a number of film programs stored that way in my archives, should we call it. And I thought it would be fun to get this file and upscale it using AI and just make it look better. And I'm going to present to you this whole documentary so you can watch it for yourself. And it's fascinating. It's really, really interesting. This was filmed during the production of his movie 1492 Conquest of Paradise. Not a film I'm a massive fan of, but it gives you an insight up to his career at that point. And the interview, some very famous people, the likes of Michael Douglas and Sigourney Weaver, appear in this documentary. And of course, Ridley Scott himself. And it's just fascinating. And I thought it would be fun to just, as I say, reinvigorate the picture quality, try and make it a bit more HD, clean it up. And I'm going to present it to you here in its entirety. So I hope you watch this. And if you're a fan of Ridley Scott, I'm sure you'll find it fascinating. And if you like this, give me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And I'll be back doing my normal kind of videos next week. So I'll see you very soon. Enjoy the show.
I mean, when it says in the script they could pull into a gas station, it would never have occurred to me to do it backwards at 80 miles an hour. You know, this is Ridley. Fill her up.
Oh, God! It was wonderful. You know, you just pray for a director who will be sadistic in that way, I think.
Ridley can see things that I can't see.
He has got a magic eye. His ability to take in an image and frame it correctly and enhance it and to use light is extraordinary.
It's 6 o'clock and we're going slowly. Well, no, we'll be all right. filming is a little bit like going to war. You know, you find your troops, you find your officers, and you have to run it in a very organized fashion, otherwise you get killed financially. So you better turn up in the morning as if it's a landing, and you know, you've got to hit the beaches running. They're stressed. They're stressed. Stressed parents. You have to be fast on your feet because whatever you planned in your head, things are always going to change.
I think he's having a lovely time on this shoot. You know, he's just like a guy hitting his real stride now. So I'm delighted that he's working on something that's so many different things. You know, this movie's a love story, and it's also a story about an amazing dream, because he also is a great dreamer.
Then you'll be on the wider camera with you as you walk up the beach, and just stop, and the others will just follow through and do whatever they're going to do. Okay?
Je pense que l'énergie, le style de Colomb n'a rien à voir avec les films qu'il a fait avant. Mais on retrouve une famille d'angles. Comme c'est quelqu'un de très visuel et qui a une grande culture, ce que n'ont pas beaucoup de cinéastes, malheureusement.
As soon as you hit the ground, jump, because you're going to be on a line, you're going to have a big marker on the tree.
C'est comme disait Picasso, il dit, il ne cherche pas, il trouve. Quand Ridley arrive dans un décor, que ce soit ce décor immense de cathédrale, bien entendu que toute sa culture, sa connaissance se met en marche.
The scene that we're now shooting is the glorious scene when Columbus has come back victorious from the New World, and is one of the biggest scenes, if not the biggest scene in the picture in terms of numbers of people.
Just have two people sit in the chair, okay?
And in fact, this scene is a compromise. We've already had to make shortenings and trimmings, and Ridley's creativity, if you like, is how do you deal with that?
I think today filming is so driven by finance. It's almost the antithesis to art, but sometimes art comes out of it.
74 easy, take one, A camera. C camera. 3 camera mute. Stand by. Stand by. Pull this to the next one.
Well, now, after so many films which have made him world famous, I think you could say that he's a narrative artist who uses a camera instead of a brush. It was in the late 50s. He was a student, an intermediate student, I suppose, but he was talented. That was the thing. And he was a good draftsman, too. But his work was a little bit like the work of the best American illustrators. And in fact, some of the staff thought his work was a bit on the slick side. Not really suitable for painting.
I found art school made me look back into myself to draw out things that I hadn't really thought about or had wanted to address or put down on paper, either in the form of a painting or later even trying to write. And I think that's where you find that funny well, that funny reserve of all your experiences. Therefore, I think all experiences are valuable, pluses and minuses.
Think too much. Besides, you didn't kill Liberty Palace.
He was the older brother. I always looked up to my older brother. He was tough in that he always seemed to have a fix and a focus on what he wanted to do with his life, where he wanted to go at a very early age, you know. And I didn't. I was always sort of scrambling a little bit. Rid was constantly drawing, you know. When everybody else was watching TV, he'd always be sitting up in the other room doing little doodles, little drawings. Yeah? And he had, even as a child, a photographic memory, which he managed to transfer down, came down through his fingers. So he did these great, very real reproductions of life, you know. And at his age, it was amazing he had that skill.
I went in there as a graphic design student, but what interested me most of all was I could develop into something I hadn't really touched at that point, which I was most interested in, which was photography. And I had already kind of started to get fairly preset that I wanted to do film. And so I wrote a script and called, at that moment it was called Boy and a Bicycle. And I grabbed the nearest actor at hand, that was my brother, and we made a half-hour movie.
It was a small movie, 16mm. I think the total cost was £250, which just seemed a lot of money to me then, a lot of money to Ridley. And it's basically about a boy who takes the day off school and rides around a fairground and reminisces about his life. And I was the boy. I smoked lots of cigarettes and got very sick.
Here I am, the only one in the world. This minute, the only kid not in school in the land. Once decided, relief. Like an exam room. Finishing bell goes, paper in front, Scott T, block caps, 4B remove. Too late for slacking mind changes then.
Rid was the cameraman, director, driver, and my dad was the second lead, and you know, we all mucked in together, and it was good.
To make a film, even the smallest film, takes a lot of organization. And in this one, I felt the most practical way to go about this was to do something closest to home, where everything was free. And therefore it became about my brother, but I guess because I wrote the screenplay, I guess it was about me.
Ridley started in the design department at the BBC. He was sentenced to 6 months of Tonight programme. And we all had those sentences when we were that young, you know. Like all young designers in a big monolith, he wasn't satisfied. We weren't getting the best programmes.
I'll get mine today. 7 times over the top without a scratch.
I remember I did a potted version of Paths of Glory. I managed to edit the fundamentals of the story of the Kubrick film down to battle, outrage, and trial, and execution. And I managed to get that into half an hour.
Can't hear you, sir! I say, where are they?
Well, it was a lot of smoke, half a dozen extras, of which I was forced to be one. And we could have done with at least another 20 or 30, but the 6 of us had to keep running around the back of camera and back in front again to have the charge over the wire.
Hello, Polygon!
He always wanted to direct. I mean, there was no question about that.
Who loves danger, to whom love is a stranger. This man is the one.
Well, I was first aware of Ridley, I suppose, in the late 60s. We were making a film for ice cream in glorious black and white, and there was this young director who was managing to make it look like it was real ice cream.
The most exciting taste since your very first ice cream. Wall's new soft golden taste.
He was getting texture, he was getting movement, he was getting appetite appeal for something which normally people just shot and said, okay, it's only a commercial, let's make it and get on with the next thing. But he obviously cared.
Now, isn't that just how ice cream used to taste?
Captain Birdseye! Captain Birdseye!
Kids come running when it's Birdseye, fish fingers.
But it was the first time I was aware of somebody who brought the love of film and a sense of composition and framing and detail to it. And it got to a point quite soon where people were looking at a reel and saying, who did that? And someone said, oh, it's bloody Ridley again, isn't it?
I still think about it as little films, and I don't think about the marketing aspects of it, frankly. I just make the movie. There was a time, I think 1 year, where I was going flat out. I was doing 3 commercials a week. So I did 150 commercials that year. I had some very good colleagues at the time, and I think it's fair to say who were fairly unique still. Alan Parker, my brother, Adrian Lyne, Hugh Hudson, and others. Those are the ones who spring to mind. They were the main competitors, but it was a form of very healthy competition in terms of the fact that on a Monday morning they'd run what they called newcomers, and I certainly used to sit in front of there every morning, Monday morning, watch who'd done what. It was like sport. It was like creative sport, because I'd sit and watch an Adrian Lyne commercial and think, my God, did he do that? And the best compliment I could give him, I used to hate him till Wednesday. It was this very interesting energy that developed in those years. And I think, but in that process, what I've just talked about, I think really forced the standard in British advertising.
The Hovis commercials were, to my mind, an evocation of a time when people of his age and mine had never lived through it quite like that, but we knew that's the way it was. And he was giving us that feeling, taking life, idealizing it, soft-focusing it, but this is the way you want it to be. And advertising is to do with hope and promise and happy endings, and he was giving it to us in a very, very beautiful way, which we'd never quite seen before.
Ridley monopolised it. Well, Ridley did the original Hovises, the ones that are the most famous ones, The Boy Walking Up the Hill, and he monopolised Hovis, and I got a hand-me-down when he went off to do the Duellists. So they said, well, if Ridley can't do it, better give it to Tony. So I got the I got the Hovis spots when Rid went off to do his movie. But they were great spots. I mean, they're sort of landmarks in advertising history in England. I always took Rid's lead, and I always followed. But reluctantly, because I felt like the younger brother who was following in the older brother's footsteps, you know. So I kept fighting it, but at the same time, everything was indicating that I should be going that direction.
Brown, hastily, that last round, get rid of it. Don't leave no cover for the rats. Fire!
I think his vision after school was to do documentaries. And Tony, I said, you know, don't do that, come and do this. Besides, it pays better. And I think finally the pay got him. Now he drives a Testarossa. In very simplistic terms, I think Tony is all about rock and roll. and I'm looking for other things. I mean, I love mainstream movies. Tony makes some of the best mainstream movies around. And I'm always trying to haul him back, because I remember in student films saying, take a step back or forward and make something personal. But everything he does is personal. When I say it's rock and roll, that's a broad stroke. But I decided to take the risk and be not necessarily commercial. I felt it was like a Western. I always wanted to do a Western, and I could never do a Western because I couldn't afford it. Because I was living in England. If I was living in the United States, my first film would probably have been a Western. And I felt, in essence, you could take The Duellists and turn it around into a story of an obsessive... It's really about obsession. Not so much revenge, because the irony at the end of it all is that they can't remember what the initial argument was about. And so I found that was a very interesting take on the idea of obsession and mindless violence.
Can we have some grass in this alleyway here? I can't see the ground, but it actually dries it up.
I think Ridley began by perhaps being more of a stylist, and when you saw the film The Duellists, it might have been rechristened The Stylists, because every frame was beautifully lit and beautifully arranged, like it would have been in a commercial. But the development and the characters and the narrative flow for many of us was a little stilted. He's overcome that happily ever since then. But I think it began the criticism people have had of commercial directors making features, that they are lovingly caring for each frame, but not really feeling too much about it, where those frames lead to and what happens and the motivation of character within it.
When I started directing actors, I had no conventional school or instruction. Or you're talking about a 2-hour film, where you're talking about the movement and the arc of a character.
Sir, kick for the general. Oh! Perfect discipline.
That's not a grenadier. Most ladylike, I assure you.
I was struggling. I didn't feel as though I was giving him what he needed. I think there were 1 or 2 occasions when I felt that way, and there was a kind of a reaching for something that he was having trouble making me understand what he needed, and I was having trouble satisfying whatever it was he was after. Maybe it was because he couldn't articulate it properly or something. But on the whole, to criticize Ridley for being strictly a visual filmmaker misses a very important point, which is that the nature of cinema is visual. That's what it's about. It's interesting how people will try to minimize his importance as a filmmaker, and yet you look out there and you will see many, many filmmakers who are out there imitating what he's done over the last 20 years.
Somebody in their wisdom in Hollywood saw The Duellists at the Cannes Film Festival, and within about a couple of weeks I was called up and asked if I wanted to do science fiction. I was curious. They sent me the script, and I thought the script was incredibly dynamic, thin on ground on the characters, but it didn't seem to matter because the film was a thriller. And so it was my first real encounter with mainstream cinema. So I said, yeah, within 13 hours I was in Hollywood.
When I accepted what was a science fiction film, I had no idea the sets would be so beautiful. They were staggering. Some of them were like sort of great Egyptian tombs or something with, I mean, they were so elaborate, and it was creating a whole world you could just sort of roam around in, you know, which I just thought it was great. You know, I didn't have to imagine anything. It was all right there.
He was actually constructing the film of Alien before he shot it in a cartoon form. It was like a comic strip, and for a 11-year-old boy, that's pretty exciting. You're watching your dad make a rather amazing comic strip, which is science fiction, and it was all very interesting to us. But when you look at the storyboards now, when you look at the film, it's actually almost exactly the same, which is really remarkable.
Wait a minute, there's movement. It seems to have life. Organic life.
I was pretty freaked out by it all because, you know, I was about 13. So I'm looking at these extraordinary paintings, which are quite disgusting, actually. And all the books and all the material at home. So like, well, this guy's pretty weird. But the alien was, I mean, it was a monster to me. I was like, Jesus, man, this is frightening stuff.
I figured my biggest problem here will be what I can do with the beast, or the seventh character, because he better be good. Because in all the films I'd seen, which are either horror or sci-fi or, you know, the exotic thriller movies, they nearly always been let down by, in the final analysis, when you see, you know, the man in the rubber suit.
The good thing was that the monster really doesn't work very good. So he cut out things or he replaced it. For instance, the cat is replacing the monster, and that makes it so real because the cat is real, and the not appearing or not seeing of the monster has much more reality or much more believable.
Dad's a bit dark. He's got a dark mind. So we went down to the studio and we knew what the scene was going to be, and it was actually the scene where John Hurt is lying on the kitchen table and the chest burster punches through his rib cage. And John Hurt they cut a hole in the, maybe I shouldn't tell this actually, maybe I should, well, they cut a hole in the table. John Hurt was slung into the hole and they had a fake chest piece and all this blood lines coming off to these blood canisters. And me and Luke sat in the corner covered in plastic sheeting, and all the crews covered in plastic sheeting, and the actors hadn't actually been briefed. They hadn't been told that the amount of blood and the amount of offal and intestines and God knows what else from the local abattoir was going to come out when this thing burst out. And they began the scene, and Ridley goes, okay, now indicates for the thing to punch through, and this fist-like object comes through John Hurt's chest, and he's writhing around, and all the crew, everybody was like, Jesus Christ, you know. So the whole room was just splattered with bits of like little chunks and fluids. It was revolting.
I remember the day we were supposed to shoot it, I walked in and the two writers were off to the side, sort of giggling, you know, very excited like kids at Christmas, which was a little weird. And then all the technicians, including Ridley, had on like these floor-length raincoats. And we had no rehearsal. And I don't, you know, in fact, it's a great master, because if you look at it for a second, all 7 of us, or 6 of us, or whatever it is, we all are going, you know, this thing jumps out of John Hurt's chest, and we all go, you know, and there it goes. And it happened so fast. And we were all so astonished. But that's the kind of thing that Ridley understands, that, you know, you can manufacture that kind of surprise for yourself as an actor, but it's much better if someone can just sort of help you get there. Alien was a pretty tough picture. It'd be hard for me to remember something I actually enjoyed. I would find it tough to do now. So imagine that to be your first film. It was very hard to get used to. I mean, I'm very proud of it, but it was, I can't remember a happy moment, really.
To work on Alien at this time, that was really terrible stress. And Ridley, that was, I think, his second film, and for me, my first. And they didn't believe him that he could do it really, and so he was very much under pressure. But once when they didn't allow him enough to film more meters, then he was crying. Yeah, it was depressing, things like that. They said, stop now, we don't allow you more meter, and he felt that was very depressed until they saw the first meter of film, and then that was so brilliant. After that, they allowed him to spend more money, and anything went well.
I think my dad is very interested in the darker side of life, darker people, darker characters, and to a lot of people, the more morbid aspects of life. I don't want to make him sound like a weekend gravedigger, but he's certainly kind of, he looks into the ground rather than up at the sky. I think a lot of the time, you know, I think he would choose William Blake over Constable. I just think it's his choice. You know, he just, some people are writers, some are writers, or some painters are just intrigued by a certain light, and his light happens to be very fiery and dark and slightly foreboding.
I'd wreck it everywhere, looking, were there cities where I could shoot this film, where I could add little bits and pieces and make it look, futuristic. I decided the most practical thing to do was to go into the back lot of Warner Bros. And take their existing backlot sets and retrofit them. Because I figured, again, that was the first step in making a decision about the way the world seemed to be going, which was deterioration. Because they didn't really understand what I was doing, because I've discovered that during the process of the way I work, that I work unconventionally. It isn't, to anyone, to me, it isn't unconventional, it's normal. And I think that was one of the big problems, was they wondered what on earth I was doing.
The Rutger Hauer death scene in Blade Runner, I think, is a really very exciting and very well-crafted piece of cinema. To be quite honest, I think it's one of the most brutal scenes in cinema that I can remember, without it actually being that violent, because of the power of power of performance, and because of the power of the atmosphere surrounding the characters. You know, I always thought that Rutger Hauer and there was a similarity, there was a connection there that I've never really seen in any of the other characters that he's worked with.
Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it?
There's a definite intensity to that character that I've seen in my dad when he gets angry at home and it's like, hide, run for cover. Yeah, but I think it's a lot to do with, I think that they have the similar mannerisms. I mean, they always do this.
think that there's, you know, it's evident in Ridley's movies and my movies, especially in Blade Runner, there's a darkness, and the darkness I think we got from the northeast of England, the darkness in terms of character darkness. I mean, it's a healthy darkness, yeah. But the northeast in terms of it is a dark and industrial area. So as you look at Blade Runner, it's continually raining. In the northeast when we were growing up, it's continually raining.
Black dog is a term that my father uses to describe darkness. It's a symbol for inactivity and depression and, oh my God, I've got to get on with something, I've got to get on with something. And he says, he actually describes it as something that looms over his shoulder. It's always there in his corner of his eye, this black dog that drives him forward. So the faster he runs, the harder it is for the black dog to keep up with him.
I think one of the films for which he is perhaps best known in our business is the Apple commercial 1984, a film which was shown on American television once only, but is now one of the most famous commercials, one of the most awarded, one of the most discussed commercials made by anybody, anywhere, anytime.
In the film, there is no mention or show of a computer. So I read the script, thought this is pretty interesting. And I really didn't ask them until very later on what Apple was. And it was only when I made it, I said, what the hell's Apple? You know, he said, it's a goddamn computer. I went, oh.
There's a saying, oh, says the love is blind. Still we're often told, seek and you shall find. So I'm going to seek a certain girl.
That helicopter shot with the Chrysler Building is still got to be one of the 5 most beautiful shots ever. Every New York film that I've seen since then, there's some take on that shot. But Ridley created it. I mean, it was Ridley's vision. He was going for a somewhat nostalgic feel in the film, in that, you know, it is kind of an old-fashioned, bittersweet romance, besides being a thriller. With Ridley, the fact that he is an artist, the fact that he was an artist prior to being a filmmaker really shows in that, you know, what I experienced with him and in his other films is that he paints with light. I always think of the sequence in the basement of that nightclub in the beginning, which was actually shot aboard the Queen Mary. Basically, they had covered the pool. And I remember that when they were setting up, Ridley had all these pools of water that he would have light reflecting out of. And it had this amazing look to it. It was so beautiful, it really did look like a painting. Just an example of how incredibly specific he is about his aesthetic vision. He literally oversaw every piece of my wardrobe, down to the exact pair of stockings. He wanted these Fogal stockings that had the seam up the back with the rhinestones.
Goodbye. It's been fun. Don't turn your back on me when I'm talking to you, Whitney.
Ridley's obviously intoxicated by beauty. So if there was certainly anything that he would understand is what a tremendous impact it would have on somebody who's not used to seeing this.
He'll take an object and he'll place it amongst other objects like a still life, and he can make the most simple thing look like the most beautiful thing, you know. Even at home, the way that he'll arrange pencils in a cup, you know, like Stabilo pencils with the little rubbers on the end. I mean, he'll just arrange it. It's his knack that he has. He'll just stick them in the pot and they'll look beautiful.
He's a perfectionist, visually and I think in his lifestyle as well. At home, it's basically like being on a set. Well, it's a little like being on a set in that everything has its place. It's very neat. It's very tidy. Things actually get moved around a hell of a lot. Furniture and stuff like this, you know.
Furniture, yeah. You can be lying in bed at sort of at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and he'll come into the room, and you're always peering from underneath the sheets, thinking, gee, God damn it, he's going to start moving furniture again. And sure enough, within 5 minutes, you were out of bed, lifting tables up and down staircases.
That's all he needs to do.
I guess it's like a process that he has to go through in order to feel like, I don't know if it's anything, I think it must be something to do with change. It must be something to do with evolution. He's always trying to evolve his environment so that he never feels like he's stagnant.
He's completely elusive and very shy and very soft-spoken. It's hard to know a lot about him, about his personal life or what goes on deep inside. He's intensely private, and because I think so much of his time and energy is consumed by the work, you don't have a lot of opportunity necessarily to hang out with him outside of that situation. There were sort of these legendary stories about his temper and behavior during the filming of Blade Runner, which I guess was very difficult, but apparently, I mean, the stories were just screaming and yelling and just wild and vicious and angry and horrible. As a matter of fact, I remember being a little bit nervous going into the shooting of Someone to Watch Over Me because I'd heard about that. And we were in the 14th week of a 14-week shoot, and I'd never heard Ridley raise his voice. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, the loudest voice I've ever heard, Ridley literally roars, "Shut the f*** up!" I mean, you know, to the whole crew, just roaring. I scared the piss out of me. I almost fell off my chair. And this dead silence comes over the set, and everybody's sort of sitting there looking around like that. And Ridley said, "And for those of you who were curious, that's the way I was every day on Blade Runner."
During Blade Runner, because I was a new boy on the block, everybody was questioning everything, and I just had to, finally the fuse went, you know. So yeah, I have bad temper.
Why don't we have two people standing doing nothing with lighters, so we're not waiting for 10 minutes while we light the candles, so they can look care of that, and everybody, because it'll take us 10 minutes to light the candles in this room. So why don't we have two guys with lighters who can all do it, okay?
Yeah.
Michael, do you want someone to go with you?
I think the process of film vis-a-vis temperament is a tough one because it's like trying to punch an eider down, you know, hanging on a clothesline. Because there are so many people involved in the process that that in itself is frustrating until you get your group of people that you like to work with, and they understand you and you understand them. Therefore, the shorthand becomes faster, more meticulous, and you get to where you want quicker than you normally would. Until you gain some kind of reputation, then it's difficult. Now I don't lose my temper. You don't gain anything, really, in the final process of screaming and yelling. I mean, all you do is make a few people embarrassed and they function less well. So it's much more of putting that kind of temperament into energy, and people pick up on it.
Got it? Yeah, that was a good one, right?
The range of Chanel commercials I've always found fascinating because it showed every sign of everything he must have liked as a movie maker. It showed last year in Marienbad with that composition in the formal garden. You see something, I think he must have got that from an old Tyrone Power film, or I remember that from, you're looking and picking up the references. The Hollywood movie queen of the 40s with the long hairs, she walks towards you with an enigmatic smile. You think, that's uncannily like Lauren Bacall or Veronica Lake or one of those ladies from the 40s. He's really just somebody who is a great quoter of movie references, which he then gives a wonderful gloss and spin to, which makes you think, he knows that I know. He's letting me into the act. God bless him.
Ridley's style, and you just have to know him, is, you know, reserved. So I think that his best sense is that he lets the actors go. You do enough different takes, and then he will, through selection process, find out what he wants. And I guess the best example would probably be, or it would be probably be the same kind of like a palette. if he was back at the Royal College of Arts working on his palette, he would just be talking about hues, colors of hues. So his direction is sort of up, down, and you know what he means. A little lighter, a little darker, the pace, and it's subtle differences, but he gets it done.
I think when he casts his pictures, he casts them with people that he completely relies on, and in terms of the acting, so he doesn't feel like he needs to be, in a sense, nurturing them all the time. But when it comes down to do the work, he gives them a lot of freedom and a great space to work in.
Hey, hey, Master Hero, Master Master, ladies and gentlemen, what I say now, what I say, you and me, baby.
Shooting Japan, logistically, was basically a nightmare because they do like to pin you down and then they do change their mind. And when I started, I had to visit the police station on 2 or 3 different occasions because they don't want to talk to the line producer, they want to talk to the director, who they will arrest on the night if you do something you said you're not going to do. And they all had ordnance survey maps, and not just to the block of the city, but to the shop doorway. So they would ask me to mark the position of exactly where my cameras would be in 3 months' time, because it's a preparatory process. And I thought, well, I'll wash this one, I'll say there and there. 3 months' time, those guys were there on the night with their maps, saying you said here and you said here. So I had to put the cameras there and there. And on one occasion, we had preset a time with a big unit to turn up 6 o'clock in the evening. It was the beginning of the death of Andy Garcia. And they cut our night by half on the spot. Said, you can't come in here till 12 tonight. And so I had a whole unit standing around, which was like 175 people, from 6 in the evening till 12 at night. So we had to shoot the whole sequence in 6 hours, which is crazy.
That's it, come on, bring it. Hey! Good, Charlie. Good move. Hey!
It became almost like a competition against the bureaucracy, so that's why I started to enjoy it.
Really loves pressure. I think he thrives to a certain extent on pressure. He's got a dark sense of humor, and it is fun to watch him when he goes. He goes. There is a reserve, a protection, emotional protection, I think, that Ridley has. Like all of us, there's certain times in our lives when you can hide behind your work. Your work is satisfying. You can control your work. Our real lives are a mess sometimes, and I think, I know I've been suspect to it at times, that you can, you just hide behind your work because you're good at it.
My father's main form of communication is storytelling.
Is that it?
I would imagine that he dreads the idea of not being able to express himself, And I think that he wants to carry on forever. He's got so much to say, I think, and he's just beginning to say it. Whenever he does a movie, I always get a feedback from him, and I'll say, well, how's it going? And there's always an atmosphere about what he says, and behind it, you know whether or not he feels good about it, or if he knows it's a bad movie or a good movie. I mean, for instance, THELMA and LOUISE, I think he knew that he was onto a good one.
And baby, you're so smart. You know you could have been a school. Well, you could have just wanted to, and I could tell the way you do the things you do.
We found this script, and I loved the woman's story. I loved the comments about men, which I thought were particularly humorous. And therefore, that is always the best way of doing everything, if you can, is try and make it funny.
God damn it, Thelma! Don't holler like that. Haven't I told you I can't stand it when you holler in the morning?
I'm sorry, doll. I just didn't want you to be late.
Thank you.
Hon?
What?
Have a good day at work today.
Uh-huh. Gee. Thank you, no.
What? You want anything special for dinner tonight?
Is he funny? No, I don't think he's funny. I mean, he kind of, we, you know, certainly made him laugh.
Y'all want a drink?
No thanks.
I'll have a wild turkey straight up and a Coke back, please.
Thelma.
Oh, what? Tell me something. Is this my vacation or isn't it? I mean, God, you're as bad as Daryl.
I'm sorry, it's just I'm not used to seeing you this way. I haven't seen you this way in a while. You're usually so sedate.
He wanted to know all about Thelma and Louise from the time they were children till the time the movie began. You know, I mean, we would have long conversations about what Thelma and Louise did in high school, what Louise thought of Daryl, you know, just their relationship. You know, he wanted to know everything about it. He was almost like having a sponge going into every crevice of my brain.
Wonder if Daryl told me yet.
Wonder if Jimmy's got back.
Why don't you just tell him to get lost once and for all?
Why don't you just say no good husband of yours? This one's on Harmon.
The sex scene was one thing he added. It was just implied in the script. The scene faded out as we started to kiss or something, and then the next morning I'm ecstatic and fulfilled. But he wanted to actually show some of the sex scene. And I was, you know, unsure about whether that was a good idea. Because if it's supposed to be the most fabulous sexual experience a person has ever had, and you show it, it better be great.
In trying to communicate with him, I mean, it was much more effective to talk about the way things looked than it was to, again, talk about motivation or whatever. I think that he just has a very unique, you know, he's a wild card. He just sees what he sees and he goes after it. Every day we would be on the set for hours wondering why we weren't going home, you know, and then you see Ridley with his camera crew racing as the sun is going down over this hill to get, you know, one last traveling shot of something, you know, and my fear was that the whole thing was going to be a voiceover, all these fabulous traveling shots.
I think I've got a little piece up here which retains certain things. Like, I'm hopeless with any form of retention of languages, but I have a block. But on a visual side, I walk around and I see life, you know, not through rose-tinted spectacles, but I obviously see it in a certain way, which I try and emulate into the films, and therefore I will see a certain kind of light, mood change, whatever. If I'm driving along in a car, that will go in, will be remembered, and it will come out in the film to be used at a certain given moment because it evoked something in me. So that's a kind of orchestration of emotions through light.
My God, this is beautiful.
Surely is.
If film is an art form, then certainly lighting is definitely an art form at a certain layer of movie making. Then there's the other layer and the other layer of movie making, right? So yes, lighting to me should contribute and should be a statement. I hate it when people say you shouldn't notice incidental, the score. I mean, it's bullshit. You should notice the score, and the score, if it's doing its job, will lift and elevate the movie. Lighting also.
At the age of 37, she realized she'd never ride through Paris in a sports car with the warm wind in her hair. So she let the phone keep ringing, and she sat there softly singing little nursery rhymes she'd memorized her daddy's easy chair.
Tell him we thank him for his hospitality.
He knows.
Tell him some of my men are staying here to build a fort. I want them to be well treated.
Ridley is a very remarkable filmmaker. The only question mark
I think still exists over his work, and it's not just Ridley, it exists over the work of most of my generation, is what do they think about, what do they care about, what's important to them. He really spent his life on the outside looking in and isn't sure what is in there, you know, what is in, what being inside of anything represents.
I think they should be separated.
Yeah.
I mean, the medium is a remarkable medium, and it does penetrate people's psyches in an extraordinary way. And that's something that should bother Ridley. What does he want to leave behind beyond a set of absolutely glorious images?
I don't know yet, because I've only done 8 movies, which is really frustrating, and therefore I just want to, it's like a child in a sweet shop. You know, I just want to move on to the next roll of wine gums, the next packet of chocolate, because I'm exploring the process and the craft of what I enjoy most. And somewhere in there, I think I'm gradually forming a pattern. I've discovered now that in a way it's an incredible waste to make a film about nothing. That doesn't mean to say that the film industry should be filled with films that only are of serious material. Films ought to be mainstream. What I try to do is up the standard and the level of what I would call mainstream cinema.
I name it La Navidad.
And I'm now trying to cast some light onto an historical event, the discovery of the New World.
After 7 months, I haven't seen any sign of a civilization that compares with Marco Polo's descriptions. No cities, no bridges, no temples roofed with gold. The mainland still escapes me, but I know it is there,